when you restrict carbohydrate for 4 weeks, and you have this metabolic pathway to burn onboard fat. Now, anytime that you have some kind of food come in that has a glucose load on the system. So let's say any carbohydrate, whether that's a Snickers bar on one end of the spectrum or a vegetable on the other end of the spectrum, they're both carbohydrate to the liver and the bloodstream, because the liver converts it into glucose into the bloodstream, and it's a glucose load on the bloodstream. Now, fruit with fiber in it, not juiced, but fruit with fiber in it, vegetables, that's going to be 2, 3, 4 tablespoons of glucose to your bloodstream. Your homeostasis is 1 teaspoon in the bloodstream. So it's always trying to get back to homeostasis by the pancreas kicking out insulin and knocking the blood sugar back down to homeostasis. And all this I was learning when I first made this shift. I was learning all about teaspoon of glucose. I'd never heard that in my nutrition classes, that's your homeostasis. And so, for example, a whole wheat bagel is like 8 to 10 teaspoons to your bloodstream. So you're dumping all, and you think about the average American diet, bagel for breakfast or a toast with eggs, and then like a sandwich at lunch with chips, or a pasta salad, or then pasta for dinner. I mean, you just threw like 60 teaspoons of glucose into your bloodstream, and your homeostasis is 1. So you have all this circulating glucose, and whenever there's circulating glucose, and especially a high teaspoon dump into your bloodstream, the body says, store fat in the cell. And it's from our seasonal eating when it was a time like we in most latitudes, especially in North America, most latitudes was maybe a 2 to 3 month window where there were things ripen in season, and we had a lot of carbs to eat, and then they were gone, and then we had to go back to fats and proteins, animal fats and proteins, for 9 months of the year. So we always ate seasonally, and we always went into a ketogenic phase, and then we went in a high protein phase, and then we went into a high carb phase. But that was always before winter. It was kind of a seasonal mechanism of safety for us, because we put on weight, signal to the body, hey, we have all these carbs right now in season. Let's put on 20 pounds. Now we're going to tap into that fat in the winter, because now the carbs aren't there anymore. And now all of a sudden that metabolic pathway clicks over from restricting carbohydrate out of necessity. There weren't any carbohydrate, right? And then we tap into it. We lose weight. We get leaner, more muscular, and then we go through that cycle again the next year. So that made sense to me from our ancestral perspective. And so the OFM model is really looking at, instead of a macro level, we're looking at on a micro level of a week of training. So we're after that initial reset phase, because it takes about 4 weeks to open up that metabolic pathway to burn on board fat by restricting carbohydrate. It takes a good 10 days before it even is hardly even open. So we have to restrict carbohydrates. When does anybody ever restrict carbohydrates more than 10 days? Hardly ever, especially in our mainstream dogma. So you're always being pushed as an endurance athlete. You need carbs, top off your glycogen. Well, it doesn't take much to top off glycogen. It's only 2,000 calories. It's not very much, but our fat stores are gigantic. And so we have, a person with 7% body fat has more than, 40,000 onboard fat calories, more than enough to run 100 miles, as Mike McKnight has proven. That you can run it without calories. Now, it isn't ideal for performance, because carbs have their place. And I want to make sure I emphasize that carbs have their place, but the type of carb matters. And so going back to this idea of this restricting carbohydrate to get that metabolic pathway open, it opens up at about 4 weeks, but it gets really efficient at about 8 to 12 weeks, meaning it keeps opening up. It opens up more and more and more. So you burn more grams of onboard fat per minute than you did, say, at 4 weeks, that you will at 8 weeks. So really, you have to kind of go through this kind of phase of 4 weeks strict keto, back off on volume, really easy running. You're going to be flat. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have really consistent energy. You're going to feel like you could skip a meal and not notice it, even though you shouldn't, but you'll feel like that. And you're starting to tap into onboard fat. Well, you continue to restrict carbohydrates in phase 2, after that 4 weeks, for another 6 weeks. So that's 10 weeks total, 4 weeks in the initial keto reset phase, and then another 6 weeks. And that 6-week window, you're bringing back strategic carbohydrates from paleo, kind of primal blueprint sources, right? And if you're going to put a name around the diet and what the food list looks like, it's like fruits and starches like potatoes, sweet potatoes. You're putting those in strategically after workouts or before a hard workout, a little bit of fruit 2 hours before a hard workout, and you'll have some pop. And so you're topping glycogen off, and you're prioritizing carbohydrates from real sources, paleo sources, in those like windows after workouts when you need to top glycogen back off. And then you're focusing on, instead of moderate protein, you're upping your protein after those reset phases, because that helps with recovery. And the more research that comes out on protein, especially animal protein, we see, the recommendations have gone from like 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight to like 1.2 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight, which is what I hit on a daily basis. So I weigh 145 pounds. I'm shooting for 160 plus of protein every day. I just track my macros of protein, and then I eat fruit and I eat starches and I eat some veggies, and that's it. And there's small portions on my plate. I still eat them, but I focus on my animal protein every day and my protein intake. So that's coming from like animal sources, eggs, everything from, herbivore, fowl, fish, eggs, raw dairy. And that's where most of my protein's coming from. Some whey occasionally, especially for convenience factor at times, or like right after a workout with like frozen fruit, mixing in a smoothie, that kind of stuff. But the key here is like strategic carbohydrate. That's really what OFM is, strategic carbs, meaning we're timing them around when our uptake's going to be good. We're not going to put it on as fat. Remember, if you have too many carbohydrates, you're signaling store fat in the cell. We want to top off glycogen and not store fat. We just want to utilize fat, right? And so, and then we want to leverage recovery with high protein. So that's really where we evolve to as we do this reset, this kind of strategic carbs. And then the ongoing is like upping protein and finding your sweet spot of like how much protein every day and what foods you like within that food umbrella or food list that we want to kind of focus on.